Hey there, knowledge seeker, it's GM Jim back at you with another video chock full of advice for you to absorb like sunlight on the beach. Yep, here comes some more virtual vitamin D. In this video, I'm going to talk about famed sci-fi author Kurt Vonnegut and his 8 rules for writing and how you can use them to enhance your D&D or Pathfinder game. If you've seen my videos, you might already know that I am the author of a couple dozen thriller novels, and Kurt Vonnegut has long been one of my favorite authors and heroes. But if he ever gets cancelled in the future for some reason, don't be mad at me. I didn't know. Anyway, let's dive into his 8 rules adapted by me for use by game masters. Number 1 is, use the time of a total stranger in such a way that they will not feel the time was wasted. You could easily boil down the second part of this quote to, don't be boring, but I think there's more to it than that. Especially the first part about being a total stranger. The fiction reader is a stranger to the author, and so should your PCs be. I'm going to give you kind of an unusual take on this piece of advice, and that is, make your campaign agnostic to player strategies. Same goes for your combat and social encounters. That is, don't ever assume you know how players are going to handle a particular problem. Sure, if you know a PC has a certain spell or ability, you can include challenges that cater to that particular spell or ability, but don't just assume that the player will behave as expected. I'm basically saying don't create puzzles with only a single solution or you could find your players frustrated. And avoid creativity with a yes and when their attempt takes you by surprise. Keep up the fun, don't waste your players' time. Next on the list is, give the reader at least one character they could root for. It's critical in your campaign to hook the players to NPCs, to places, and to events. Gold and magic items are great rewards, but if you want the kind of campaign they'll be thinking about between sessions, you have to make the world a place they want to improve, a place they care about when it's in jeopardy. If you fail to do this, you will fail to make an interesting campaign. So how do you do this? Well, I go into a lot more detail about it in my video on making killer villains, so just go watch that. Basically, take the time to connect your world personally to your PCs. Their backstories, their goals, their desires, make them invest in what's going on. The third rule is, every character should want something, even if it's only a glass of water. This very much goes hand in hand with getting your players to invest. Fictional characters are defined by what they want, by their goals, and it's the same in tabletop games. Imagine a campaign that's nothing but downtime. It's probably fun and full of hijinks at first, but it will quickly become boring when it lacks a rudder. In sandbox-style campaigns, your players should be seeking out their goals themselves with some gentle prodding from the game master. When running a published adventure like Curse of Strahd or Wild Beyond the Witchlight, this rudder is baked in. But either way, the players have to find it. Help them. Make them care about what's going on so they will. Put treasured NPCs in danger. Harm things the PCs care about. Make them want to face adversity to set things right. Next, Vonnegut says, every sentence must do one of 2 things, reveal character or advance the action. Now this rule we're going to have to interpret a little more loosey-goosey, because sometimes things happen in TTRPGs that may feel like time wasters. You know when players spend an hour plotting a heist and then follow exactly 0% of that plan? Or how they'll spend 2 hours at the magic item shop perusing wares? These digressions are usually fine, because the point here is that if your players are having fun, it's not wasted time. And you can always have that magic item shop visit become a way to, quote, advance the plot. The shopkeeper could have useful information about the current quest. Or another important NPC just happens to stroll into the shop to alter the scene just when things are getting boring. As long as you're keeping tabs on the mood and the pacing, you'll figure out when to shift things by having an unexpected event happen. Remember, like author Raymond Chandler said, you can always have a band of nasty goblins burst through the door. Maybe I've paraphrased his quote a little bit. Fifth on the number Number 5 on the list is start as close to the end as possible. And this reminds me of Sly Flourish's advice to have a strong start. He says instead of letting the players begin the session by chatting about what they want to do next, just throw them into a situation. Combat, a tense social encounter, or something like that. If you were able to end the previous session on a cliffhanger, then this is already done for you. But the solid advice to take from Kurt Vonnegut here is to just skip the boring parts. In Campaign 1 of Wizards and Wordslingers, sometimes the players would spend too much time recapping things to other NPCs. Like an NPC would send them on a quest, and then after they would come back and explain in detail to that person about what happened. And this is my fault for allowing it to play out this way too many times. And sometimes this is good for the players to hear the recap. But often it's not necessary and just slows the pacing down. You can usually just say, you bring that NPC up to speed, and then move on. Sometimes you can start the adventure right outside the dungeon and skip over those travel segments. Start as close to the end as possible when doing otherwise would harm the pacing. And now we come to, be a sadist. No matter how sweet and innocent your leading characters, make awful things happen to them in order that the reader may see what they are made of. This is more or less the same thing we already covered in points number 2 and 3. Getting your players to invest in your world and giving them opportunities to become its saviors. Put treasured NPCs in danger, harm elements the PCs care about. Make the big bad do absolutely terrible things to people and places that don't deserve it. TTRPG players tend to have an innate sense of justice, and when you inflame that, you give them a reason to keep adventuring. Give their characters a chance to become the heroes your world needs. 7th on the list is, write to please just one person. If you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will get pneumonia. This is just kind of Vonnegut's weird sense of humor. Obviously, we don't create tabletop campaigns for just one person unless it's a one-on-one campaign. But I think the advice here is about keeping it simple. It's fine to throw out a handful of plot hooks to see which ones the players are going to bite on. But once they commit, help them keep their focus. Let those other plot hooks fade into the background or roll them into the current main quest somehow. Players function better when everyone knows what's at stake and everyone knows what's in front of them. And of course, it's always fine for the players to pivot. Your job is to hang out the front of the train, furiously laying down tracks to wherever the players want to go. Finally, give your readers as much information as possible, as soon as possible. To hell with suspense. Readers should have such complete understanding of what is going on, where and why, that they could finish the story themselves should cockroaches eat the last few pages. When it comes to fiction, I'm not sure if I agree with Mr. Vonnegut here. But this is good advice for tabletop games, if only for the reason that a lot of the time, your players are confused. Sly Flourish says that half your players don't know what's going on half the time, and I found this to be true sometimes, although it depends on the group. We live in a highly distracted age, so I think one of the greatest sins a GM can commit is to assume that everyone is on the same page. Just like I said for rule number 7, players function better when everyone knows what's at stake and everyone knows what's in front of them. So that's a breakdown of Kurt Vonnegut's 8 rules for writing and how you can use them to enhance your tabletop game. Just a little side note, if you haven't read Cat's Cradle and Breakfast of Champions, do yourself a favor. The man is a literary legend for good reason, and you've never consumed anything quite like his fiction. There'll be links down in the description below if you want to sample his books. And since I have you, can I get you to hit that like button down below? I think Kurt would want you to. Until next time, this is GM Jim. Now go dive deep into the lush world of gaming.